As you can see from my vaguely horrifying thumbnail and this medley of defensive coaches, the Seahawks have undergone significant change to their defensive coaching staff. Out is Ken Norton Jr. and in has come Sean Desai and Karl Scott, with the promotion of defensive line coach Clint Hurtt to the defensive coordinator position. Desai brings with him experience in the Vic Fangio defense and last year coordinated the Chicago Bears defense. His experience working under Vic Fangio matches the experience Hurtt has under Fangio too, and Karl Scott spent a lot of his career coaching under Nick Saban at Alabama. These things are relevant because the Seahawks are moving to a 3-4 defense in 2022, and we're expecting to see a lot of too high presentation pre-snap, the sort of stuff which is in vogue around the league. Think about the Brandon Staleys of the world, along with matchup zone coverage. All of this kind of lends itself to disguise defense, or defensive disguise, which is a thorny, kind of loose word which can be applied to a lot of elements. It's thrown around quite a lot. In this video, we're going to actually look at how Ken Norton Jr. in 2020 and 2021 particularly already laid the foundations for this direction, and I'm sure Clint Hurtt had a say too. Since 2020, the Seahawks were using a 3-4 looking bare front as their base defensive front. Expect that to continue, and in 2021, both Sports Info Solutions and True Media charted the Seahawks as being top 5 in middle field open coverage. 2021 also saw the Seahawks establish a new defensive coverage, new under Carroll, called Clio, which was a matchup zone middle field open coverage that aggressively pattern matched routes, a half quarter deal, which I've wrote about, and that was very much like some of the Vic Fangio coverage concepts. Looking at the opening drive versus the Green Bay Packers really exhibits this defensive disguise that Seattle had already been playing with. The difference now, of course, is they've honed their personnel into being even more 3-4 like, and they've added a group of young coaches who are probably more closely aligned and kind of harks back to the days of 2011 when that young coaching staff decided we're going to hone in on being a really good 4-3 under and 4-3 over cover 3 defense. So week 10 2021 at the Green Bay Packers, the Seahawks lost 17-0. That's not really the whole story. Russell Wilson obviously was not right in this game, and he ended up essentially admitting that he came back 4 weeks too early from his finger injury and surgery. And yet you can see that the defense held the Packers to 3 points until the fourth quarter, where they kind of broke and allowed 2 touchdowns. Aaron Rodgers, who I think we can all agree is a quality quarterback, he had 23 completions after 37 attempts, passed for 292 yards, but 0 touchdowns and 1 interception. Meanwhile, Seattle also managed to hold Davante Adams to 0 touchdowns too, even though he did get his yards. Coming into this game after the slow start, which I think really is what did it in for Ken Norton Jr., as consecutive slow start, along with that desire to get younger on the defensive coaching staff. But then the Seahawks improved. Since week 4, going into this Packers matchup, they'd allowed the 4th fewest points in the NFL, and they logged the best third down percentage, which Karl re-emphasized. This data was backed up by the tape, where Seattle was playing a lot better situational football and execution, and Norton was calling better calls that fit his personnel. Meanwhile, Green Bay was undoubtedly a quality offense. Before Rodgers' own personal choices forced COVID absence, the Packers' attack had ranked 4th best in DVOA. To study Seattle's defensive game plan on the opening drive versus Green Bay, we first have to understand what they were expecting to get from the Packers. Bobby Peters, who literally wrote a book on the 2020 Packers offense, described that offense as a pure progression +1 drop back team. They take the one-on-one, and if it's not there, work the progression. Now that one-on-one was often to Davante Adams, aligned as the X receiver. With Adams now gone, Peters pointed out that the Packers are probably going to have to turn to more pure progressions without that +1 looking at the one-on-one first deal. They can't really rely on that X receiver winning a one-on-one or what looked like a one-on-one. But in terms of this Week 10 2021 matchup, showing the Packers what looks like a one-on-one pre-snap can lead to good things happening in terms of changing the picture, the defensive disguise. Meanwhile, Pro Football Focus's Seth Galina tweeted out an expertly annotated heat map from the 2021 season of the Packers offense. The annotations show the Packers from their quick game stuff to their intermediate and then to their deep. And it's spooky how this Green Bay opening drive from week 10 matches this heat. Let's get to the tape. This is the first play of the game. Not the best field position. Ball on the 36, not ideal. Green Bay aligns Aaron Jones, their running back, out wide, and that gives them an indicator because there's a cornerback over him. You're not going to waste, as I like to phrase it, a cornerback on a running back in coverage if it was man-to-man, and so this tells them they're getting zone coverage. They then shift Jones into the backfield next to Aaron Rodgers. Seattle is in their nickel bear defense. It's called a Falcon front, aligned to the field, which generally means you're getting cover 3. For spacing purposes, it suits cover 3 to align the Leo defensive end, which here is Carlos Dunlap, to the field, and the Will linebacker, the 5th guy down at the line of scrimmage, to form that bear front in nickel to the boundary. You can see they're trying to keep their too high presentation pre-snap. However, this front spacing, while it makes sense from a field and boundary perspective, it does not make sense versus this formation. This is a slot trips formation, so it's a nub formation where to the field side, Dunlap has 3 threats, whereas Brooks only has 1 threat. And Seattle has 3 coverage guys, Adams, Trey Brown, Brooks, to the tight end. It therefore makes sense for Dunlap in this instance to be the dropper, because you need to be able to drop and rotate better in this instance to get the numbers back to the trip. Otherwise, you'd be rushing Dunlap and asking Ugo Amadi to play the curl flat, or what Seattle would call the buzz, outside underneath space. And then you'd be asking Bobby Wagner to play the strong hook. Now, Wagner playing the strong hook is the first guy who's going to arrive to the party if the number 3 receiver, Adams, is running a bubble. That's too much space for a linebacker to have to cover versus Devontae Adams, especially if there's run conflict, or even like a little stick route off an RPO. It's just too much space, and especially in Wagner's case, right, where he was aging and his legs are starting to go. So you can see here, Brooks actually points once the running back gets back into the backfield to Dunlap, telling him to drop. So what Seattle is doing is they're dropping Dunlap into the strong hook. This places his defender in Dunlap closer to Adams in a better position. So Seattle gets better spacing purposes from their defense. The ball is thrown with this attached run action. I suspect it's a pre-snap RPO with Rodgers reading whether there's a player capping Devontae Adams, and there isn't. But Dunlap gets off the line of scrimmage, hustles to Adams and the quick little route into the flat. Ugo Amadi does a great job knocking back in his knockback and win outside assignment in his buzz to the slot receiver Randall Cobb. Dunlap is pressing this heavily from the inside and removing the cutback for Adams, and Ugo pulls through really nicely on Cobb, running this play further out to the perimeter, at which point time has elapsed and there's very little room. It's basically going to the sideline. DJ Reed's able to join a bit of a hit, and so is Quandre Diggs running through the alley. So that's a 3-yard gain, but Seattle managing to get their defense into a better look, which was pretty unexpected. And now we have 2nd and 7. Now we have the Packers coming out in a spread doubles 11 personnel formation and motioning their back out of the backfield to get another zone coverage indicator. They stick with this spread empty formation. Rodgers tries to throw his speed out to Devontae Adams, and it's almost picked by DJ Reed playing a squat cover 2 technique. And you probably think, well, what on earth is Aaron Rodgers doing here? Why would he do this? Now, my theory is Rodgers thought he was getting a different coverage pre-snap. I spoke about Clio pass coverage, which Seattle had well and truly established by this point. If we pause it at the snap, it looks as though Trey Brown is playing a squat cover 2, Quandre Diggs is playing in a deep half, Ugo Amadi is playing in a vertical hook, Bobby Wagner's playing the final 3, Jordan Brooks is playing the weak quarter flat, so basically matching the 2. Jamal Adams is playing like a hard quarter technique, aligning basically at 12 yards. And DJ Reed, when Rodgers actually looked at him, looked as though he was playing a press kind of quarter. Seattle's actually just playing cover 2, actually drop 9 cover 2, which we'll get to. But Reed gets a straight up outside release from Randall Cobb, and he plays his squat technique very well. He gets hands on to buy time for his deep half safety Adams to work over the top if it's going to be thrown, taking all the air out of the outside release. But the start of this reroute also looks like to Rodgers as though Reed is going to man turn with the concept, with the outside release. Now, if it was Clio and it was the quarter element of this, Reed would man turn with this and he'd trail Cobb down the field, essentially turning into man-to-man press quarter technique. However, as Rodgers' back foot hits, Reed actually then flips his butt to the sideline after his reroute and looks up where the number 2 receiver is. You can already see the balls coming out from the quarterback. Brooks is out leveraged, playing a quite aggressive, weak curl, like basically matching up inside leverage on Adams. But Brooks knows that he has the help here of the squat technique, cover 2 cornerback of Reed. Reed jumps the route, and I'm sure this is one he'd like to have back. He perhaps could have intercepted it. From the end zone angle, you can see this little stutter from Rodgers is, I think, him realizing he didn't have what he thought he had here, and him just going, I'm going to throw it anyway, and he almost pays for it. Now, interestingly, remember I said that the speed out to Devontae Adams, as Seth's work showed, was a big part of this offense. Well, also stick concept was, especially from this formation. You can see Seattle tries to combat that and help out Bobby Wagner and Ugo Amadi by actually dropping 2 of their defensive linemen. So it's a drop 9, cover 2. Cool. And look how much they pack the stick route, the primary throw if Rodgers is working the other side, of the number 3 receiver. There's just an absolute cluster of guys. And because it's quick game, the pass rush isn't necessarily needed. The ball's already coming out immediately. Seattle clearly had brushed up on this, done some good work. Here we have an unfortunate example for Seattle where on the 3rd and 7, and as I said, they'd become the best third down percentage team in the league. But here, DJ Reed just slips and gets beat over the top. He gets a funky kind of release and oversteps a touch inside as he tries to grab on to then switch back with the outside element. His cleats get stuck in the turf. Rodgers completes the explosive play. Scheme-wise, it's unfortunate because what Seattle does here is very clever. By using this mugged up front where they show 6 guys down at the line of scrimmage, including Bobby Wagner sugaring the center, Seattle gets man-on-man pass protection, or big-on-big 5-0. They end up, though, rushing just 4 in a simulated pressure. Wagner drops back into the weak hook of cover 3, and Carlos Dunlap drops back into the strong hook. The Packers' protection call for the 6 guys down at the line of scrimmage left Ryan Neal as the responsibility of the running back. Even with Seattle just rushing 4, and the Packers having 6 guys back in pass protection, Neal still gets the matchup on the back, which is what you want when you're doing this sort of thing, because it's easier for Neal to beat a back than it is for Neal to beat an offensive lineman. So you've kept the running back in, meaning you don't have to worry about the check down kind of route. You've rushed just 4, and you've essentially made them waste an offensive lineman. The Packers run on the front side of this a dagger combination, which Ugo Amadi does a fantastic job of being aware that his 2 sort of sit route is bait, and he tries to get depth into the dagger window almost. Rather than being that curl flat or buzz defender, he almost becomes a deep curl. He also kind of covers up for Dunlap being in the strong hook. Technically, Dunlap is the guy responsible for this, but it's Dunlap, right? It's just unfortunate the pass rush didn't have a chance to do a bit more because the ball was out so fast. But stuff like this happens in football. On the 1st and 10 in the Seattle's red zone, we have a nice run fit from the team here, even if there isn't so much disguise element to it. This is just them running over cover 3 weak sky, or most likely a field called front. As the curl flat player, Jamal Adams has his number 2 receiver disappear on the jet, and so the defensive front behind this defensive line action knows they have to fall back their gap. Wagner goes from covering his A gap to falling back, clearing the jet motion, basically accounting for the extra gap that would cause if it was to block Carlos Dunlap. So basically the C gap / D gap player, depending on how it could have developed. Brooks falls back from his B gap to the A gap, and then Jamal Adams, with his number 2 disappearing to Wagner's side, he falls back into Brooks's old B gap. It's a simple stretch action from the Packers from the shotgun. The guard's able to free release because of Seattle's front, and Adams looks to turn him back in the B gap. Brian Monet, as the one technique nose tackle, does a superb job one-on-one versus the center. He knocks this back and basically sets the edge of the defense, even though he's at nose tackle, and forces the early cutback. He even manages to get rid of his block at the end and join the tackle. Poona Ford is excellent at the 3 technique spot, knocking back his primary key, the guard, even on the run block away, which is quite a difficult lateral step. He stays on the guard with this kind of scoop combination block. Eventually Ford tries to get rid of the block and make a play with the running back cutting all the way back. The running back is trying to cut all the way back, Aaron Jones, because Brooks in the A gap has shown up front side. As the guard gets rid of Ford and tries to go to Brooks falls back with the running back's cutback, joins the tackle, which is just superb ducking and diving, hiding behind bodies and finding the ways to make the play. Meanwhile, Carlos Dunlap does a good job playing surf technique, filtering down the line of scrimmage to hit the cutback first after he's eliminated the threat of the quarterback keeper. It's a 3-yard gain. Seattle did pretty much everything right. This is a beautiful example of Clio defense in a very unique situation. The Packers are in their spread doubles formation again. Now that's relevant in how it impacts Ugo Amadi at nickel. However, first and foremost, from boundary to field. We have Adams into the boundary. He's playing a hard quarter technique. We have DJ Reed. He's playing a quarter technique. We have Jordan Brooks. He's in his quarter flat technique. We have Bobby Wagner, who's playing to the final 3 receiver. We have Ugo Amadi, who's in a vertical hook technique. So taking the 2 receiver all the way vertical, matching it vertical, high and inside, basically. And then we have Quandre Diggs in a deep half zone. And we have Trey Brown in a squat cover 2 cloud technique. So it's half, quarter with this vertical hook. Now the spread doubles element of this is relevant because the guys who are in the run fit are the cornerback, Trey Brown, Jamal Adams as the hard quarter safety, Bobby Wagner as the final 3 middle linebacker, and Jordan Brooks as the quarter flat player. However, because it's spread doubles, Brooks has a number 2 he needs to match up with. Jamal Adams has a slot to account for, so he can't play it as aggressively as if it was a tight end and his keys are different. Meanwhile, while Trey Brown can show up in the run fit, he's going to be late because of just the spacing. He's so far out there. He is technically the 4th player or whatever, but there's too much distance. And Seattle, at all costs, wants to keep Ugo Amadi out of the immediate run fit so he can play his vertical hook technique, which is essentially playing man-to-man on the 2 receiver vertically downfield. So you can't do that and expect him to fit into the immediate run fit. So how does Seattle get out of this? Well, they set the 3 technique rather than setting him to the field and keeping him with the nickel, Ugo Amadi. They set the 3 technique into the boundary. So the B-gap bubble is actually on Ugo's side. If you were having to fit this up, you'd expect Ugo to fold into the B-gap and Wagner to fit into the A-gap. With Brooks, because of the 3 technique, meaning there's no gap to his side of the field, Brooks able to match up on his slot 2 receiver without conflict. However, as I've just said, with Ugo Amadi playing this important vertical hook technique, you don't want him having to fit into a run gap. So what Seattle does is they post-snap change where the 3 technique is, moving their defensive line. Because we get to pass set, it's hard to see. What this really is Poona Ford and Rasheem Green are pirate stunting. So Ford is looking to get into the A gap. Green is looking to get into the B gap. Bobby Wagner, he is fitting this B gap. And so Jordan Brooks, rather than having to fit a B gap, which is more interior in the run fit, he basically has a C gap, which he has the time to clear what his number 2 slot receiver is doing because of the movement. And he also has better space to play this outside gap rather than having to play the inside B gap. So the pirate stunt buys Brooks time and gives him an easier run fit, aligning the front into the boundary. Seattle, to the spread doubles 2x2 formation, is able to cover down to both slots while playing an even spacing and staying gap sound. It ensures Ugo Amadi does not have an immediate run fit to worry about. Now they actually get pass, and this is how Clio works the quick game, which again is a cool Easter egg. With a fast 3, Jordan Brooks pushes, knowing that Bobby Wagner's matching up with the final 3, and he takes the running back out of the flat. Wagner basically replaces Brooks with the push call and matches up on the final 3. Alan Lazard in this little sit route. DJ Reed, he gets a slant, sees Rodgers is setting up, and he basically plays it like man. And Adams is lurking in his hard quarter, ready to make the play. Rodgers gets a weird kind of look and clutches the ball to the half side where the vertical hook and the real Clio element is going on. Ugo Amadi's number 2 receiver, who he's tasked with playing the vertical hook to, disappears into the flat. And so Ugo matches Devontae Adams' slant route with his vertical hook technique, the new number 2 basically from the quick game. Amadi trails this high and inside with Quandre Diggs helping in the deep half over the top. Meanwhile, Trey Brown in his squat cover 2 cloud technique, he got a nice reroute on Adams, sensing him going to his inside. He looked up where the number 2 was, flipping his hip to the sideline, found his number 2 in the flat, worked for depth just to clear whether Adams was going to bend on a corner, and just looks at the quarterback. So beautiful quick game elimination on the coverage side of this. Unfortunately, when Pirates stunting, there is still a pass responsibility. Because the 3 tech is going inside a gap and the end is then replacing the 3 tech in the B gap, there is no contain to that side. It's therefore the job of the nose tackle on the other side of the field to loop, to contain, and come all the way around. Now, it's a slightly unfamiliar call for Seattle, as I've explained, so it could be that this just did not get communicated. But Brian Monet rushes the guard head up as like the A-gap push player in the pass set. He actually gets off the guard because of the pirate stunt coming towards him, and he actually ends up getting through the front door, basically. The problem is the edge has collapsed, and Rodgers, after clutching to that side of the field, sees there's so much space and just takes off on the scramble for yards. Thankfully for Seattle, Rasheem Green managed to draw a holding penalty. The offensive lineman doesn't really let him turn and run with Rodgers, so it's probably a fair call, and Seattle gets bailed out. But still, smart defensive mechanics going on here to make their guys coverage calls. This is their aggressive middle field open matchup zone coverage work, and it did kill quick game. And if the nose loops to contain, it completely kills everything. On the 2nd and 17, we got Seattle really ramping up their disguise. This looks like their nickel bear Falcon front, with them running the same Clio coverage again. Looks like to Devontae Adams, they're playing a hard quarter with Jamal Adams into the boundary, and also DJ Reed's playing his quarter on Adams, playing able to play press because it's a single receiver. And then Jordan Brooks is a quarter flat player, basically matching up on the running back. So it's essentially like 2-over-1 for Seattle to Adams, with Brooks 1-on-1. Front side looks like Wagner's playing to the final three, the three receiver here, and that Ugo Amadi's ready to play his vertical hook to the number 2 receiver, and that Trey Brown at the top of the screen is playing his squat cover 2 technique, the Clio side of the coverage, the stuff side, with quandre Diggs over top in the deep half. Instead, Seattle called in drop 8 cover 3 because they've got 2 curl players next to them and a middle hook in Wagner. The outside underneath players can play more aggressive to the flat, and so Seattle got Brooks flaring out quickly to this flat route. As Rodgers looked at that, probably slightly puzzled, Adams crept down into the curl, and Rodgers was given enough to be dissuaded from throwing this to Adams. He would have been absolutely whacked. And Wagner was also creeping over there in his middle hook. Rodgers obviously had time to come to the backside and his slant flat combination there to the field. And the weak part of the coverage really for Seattle, with Amadi flaring out to the flat aggressively, but Dunlap trying to squeeze the 3 so much inside that he was quite late getting back in his curl to the number 2, to the slant route near the numbers. However, Dunlap did manage to get over there somewhat, and as Rodgers looked to throw it, he was dissuaded. He clutched the ball once more, and so that's 2 clutches on the play, a full field read where Rodgers didn't like any of what he was seeing, by which point Rasheem Green in the 3-man rush managed to get home, win versus the left tackle, and sack Rodgers. Finally, we have the 3rd and 22. The Packers were flirting with the idea of putting their 3 receivers to the left of the field. They eventually aligned with 4 strong to the defense's left. Seattle once more showed presentation that could have been Clio, right? You could easily see this being a squat cornerback technique from Trey Brown in his cover 2. You could see the Ugo Amadi playing the vertical hook. Instead, Seattle called the perfect coverage for killing any kind of dagger route into the strong hook, or concept designed to conflict the strong hook of cover 3. They called 3 strong buzz, rotating quandre Diggs down into the strong hook, and he was right there to rally to the encouraged check down thanks to his depth of Devontae Adams, made the tackle to bring up 4th down and force the field goal. Whether the post-will combination was real or not, deeper than this, we don't really know, but because Diggs is holding his depth until the ball is out, there's going to be no room for it. In addition to that, Ugo Amadi is probably able to carry this wheel route from his buzz roll, and Trey Brown is going to be able to squeeze the seam from his midpoint, his zebra 3rd technique. Ultimately, Seattle versus 4 receivers to one side encouraged the check down and got themselves off the field. This game between Carlos Dunlap and Kerry Hyder Jr. is somewhat clumsy, but it's also going to cause them a bit of problems. Dunlap's speed to power ball rush knocked the tackle back enough to really make Rodgers think about the check down. So the takeaway here, and why we've spent, the last 20 or so minutes talking about a game from 2010 with the old defensive coordinator, is that Seattle have had their defensive foundation set to cause problems for the very best NFL offense quarterbacks from a disguise multiplicity standpoint. These coverages have already been run. They already suit their current skill sets. Karl Scott, Sean Desai, and Clint Hurtt with more authority will bring more coverage tools, more tweaks, and more coaching details, along with probably a harmony and all being on the same page that will benefit and build on these foundations. It's easy to forget from week 6 to week 18 of the NFL season, Seattle's defense actually came in ranked 6th in EPA per play, with a focus on getting the right personnel up front to make more of the 3-4 stuff work and really honing in on outside linebackers. Perhaps they can perform better in yards allowed too and get off the field sooner, and hopefully also they won't start slow. My assessment, though, is that the defense can be good enough to somewhat carry an offense which we expect in 2022 to have some difficulties. I hope this sort of explained elements of defensive disguise and the schematics that go on in terms of calling a game. If you've got any questions, please do comment below. I encourage the YouTube comments. Also, you can tweet me at Matty F. Brown. Do drop me a follow if you haven't already. Please like and subscribe to this video, share it amongst friends. Tariq Woolen one got posted in the Seahawks Reddit. That's very kind of you. I appreciate all of you. Have a good one.